Hey guys, welcome back to Reserved Investments on YouTube. So a question that I got asked during one of my Q&As was, Sean, what is your opinion on the Overstreet Comic Book Price Guide when compared to GP Analysis or services like GP Analysis that offer online real-time pricing data for graded comic books? Is the Overstreet Comic Book Price Guide still relevant in the year 2020 and beyond? So I thought that this question would be better served if I did a separate video on this topic all on its own, which is how this video came to fruition. So we're going to have a detailed discussion today about the Overstreet Comic Book Price Guide, the pros and cons of it, as well as GP Analysis and the pros and cons of GP Analysis. Now, most of you out there probably already know what the Overstreet Comic Book Price Guide is. It's a yearly publication put out by Gemstone Publishing that is written and authored by Robert M. Overstreet. This is the most recent edition. This is the 50th edition. It's available on Amazon right now. You can get it probably for under $30. I pre-ordered my copy. Or you can get it in Barnes & Noble, wherever books are sold. Again, this is a yearly guide. This is printed once per year. GP Analysis, on the other end of the spectrum, is a digital service platform. What it is it is a site that you pay either a monthly or yearly subscription fee to. It's $10.95 per month or $119 per year. If you sign up for the annual subscription, you do get it a little cheaper. And what it is certain dealers, certain auction houses report into GP Analysis with completed auction sales or prices of their items that sold on their dealer websites. They give that information to GPA. I shouldn't say give. GPA, to my knowledge, does pay for that information. And GPA Analysis does compile a listing of what certain comic books sold for, in what grade, and when. So it's real-time pricing information that is pretty much up to the minute. So what makes GPA Analysis great is that the pricing information it provides is pretty much data at the speed of light, which today, time is money. Let's be honest. We're talking about collectible markets here that are established. The comic book marketplace is established. That's not to say it's not speculative. I've said this before. I'll say it again. Those of you that are investing blindly in graded comic books, in vintage comic books, you're probably going to have a surprise coming over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. Prices are going to start to flatline, they're going to start to fall, and they're going to start to correct. That is going to happen. I understand that a lot of the hype-driven YouTube channels out there don't want to talk about that because they're too busy propping up the value of a copy of Amazing Spider-Man 129 or your Incredible Hulk 181 or your Amazing Fantasy 15s, which ironically, that book has stabilized and started to lose a little bit of value over the last few months, few years, if you track it correctly. But what we do on this channel is, this is a channel that's geared towards the economics and financial aspect of investing in antiques and collectibles. So I provide the truth to these markets as I see them, as they're happening in real time. Now, where am I going with this? Well, when it comes to markets that are quickly changing, quickly evolving, whether we're talking about the market for Magic the Gathering game cards and collectibles, or Pokemon, or vintage video games, which are really in a massive speculative bubble right now, or even vintage toys, or even vintage comic books, which are also highly speculative right now. Most people require up-to-the-minute pricing information. That's not to say that GP Analysis is not without its flaws. I'm going to get to that in a minute. I'm focusing right now on the Overstreet Comic Book Price Guide. One of the major flaws we have with the Overstreet Comic Book Price Guide is that since it's in print form and because it's only published once a year, the minute this book hits the market, all the pricing information in it is just about obsolete. It doesn't matter. It's a fugazi. It does not matter. It is no longer a representation of the market as a whole because X number of months already went by since this information was put in the print and put in this book. There is a lead time in how long it takes to publish a book like this. As somebody who is an author and a writer in the antiques and collectibles trade, I can tell you that even in newsprint publications, there is a several week lead time for most of the publications that you get that are delivered to your door if it's related to a monthly periodical. So those of you out there that are like me that subscribe to numismatic news, if you're a coin collector or Coin World, there is usually a several week lead in to that information. So by the time that information is getting printed in physical form, it is already obsolete. This is something that I don't think a lot of people realize, where this is a monumental change in the antiques and collectibles trade. Back in the pre-internet era, if you were operating in the antiques and collectibles trade, that's pretty much what you had to go on. You had to take an author's word for it. You had to take a publishing house's word for it that this item, this X item, sold for X number of dollars at this particular time. That's the only information you had. Well, in the internet age, all that changed. We have pricing information at the speed of light. If I want to log on to Heritage Auctions right now, I can click on past auctions and I can get immediate price history. I can do the same thing on Comic Link, Morphy's auctions, Hakes auctions, Comic Connect, Certified Link, Cowan's, Sotheby's, Christie's. Any auction company I want to go to is going to have that up-to-date pricing information from their most previous sale online, with few exceptions. There are some auction companies that choose not to make that information very easy to locate on their site. Other auction companies choose not to put it on their sites at all. So it is a crapshoot. But overall, most reputable auction houses will put that data on their website that is free of charge, meaning anybody who either has an account with that particular auction house or can peruse their website, they can find that information. Another thing that is a flaw with the Overstreet Comic Book Price Guide is that it only focuses on grades up to 9.2, and it's geared towards the raw ungraded market. Now, I know what you're going to say, Sean, that's not true. There's market reports that talk about graded comic books. I'm going to get to that, Timmy. Calm down, calm down. Take your Adderall. We're going to get to that. We're going to cover all the pros and cons in this video, okay? Chill. Just chill. Switch to decaf, for crying out loud. Okay, coming up next, another flaw we got to talk about is that dealers can easily hype and manipulate the information in their market reports. Now, to be fair, one of the pros that I state about the Overstreet Comic Book Price Guide is when compared to GPA Analysis, the market reports is what makes this particular book stand out. You can get a lot of great information from the market reports. Don't get me wrong. The problem that I have, if you read some of the market reports written by auction houses and dealers, you kind of have to read it with a grain of salt. There are certain people, certain collectors, certain writers out there that write those market reports, and they really hype up the value or demand for certain comic books, and other comic books, they seem to hype up the rarity of those particular books. I'm not saying everybody does this. There's a lot of people that I respect highly in the comic book marketplace that write market reports for the Overstreet Comic Book Price Guide. I'll name some. Josh Nathanson, he sometimes writes a market report. He owns Comic Link. He does a fairly good job. Sometimes his reports do get a little bit hype driven, but overall, almost every report that I read from him is a little bit balanced. So I do like his report. Greg Reese, another great dealer out there. Greg Reese is probably one of the best comic book dealers you could do business with, bar none. If you're in the market for vintage comic books, graded comic books. I've had a lot of great conversations with him. Actually, he helped me put together my original graded comic book collection that sold for a significant profit back in 2015, 2016 through Heritage Auctions. I give him a lot of credit. Bob Storms, another great guy. He hangs out on the CGC Comic Forum. So does Vintage Comics. Another great guy that I think also writes a market report, if I'm not mistaken, for the Overstreet Comic Book Price Guide. I would have to check. But he's also a great guy. They're all great guys. But what I am stating is, in most cases, you do have to take the market reports with a grain of salt. Some of them, not all the market reports, are ripe with market manipulation. If you're somebody like me who's been reading this stuff for decades or more, You know how to spot market manipulation and market hype when you see it. Now, all those negatives being said, what are the pros on owning the Overstreet Comic Book Price Guide in the year 2020? Well, let's talk a little bit. I've said this before, I'm going to say it again. Market reports. Market reports are a pro and a con. To be fair, if the average person out there is just starting to collect vintage comic books, or maybe you're curious about investing in CGC graded comic books, I will always tell that person to pick up a copy of the Overstreet Comic Book Price Guide, because one of two things is going to happen. You're going to start looking at all the pretty advertisements from all these comic dealers and grading companies, and it's going to give you a starting point for you to at least log on and check out some of this information. Whether you log on to Greg Reese's comic site, or Comic Link, or Heritage Auctions, or you find a link to the CGC comic book grading company, either way, it's going to help you in your request. Another thing that's going to happen, if you do start reading these market reports and you're new to the scene and you go, oh my gosh, a giant size X-Men 1 in CGC 9.6 is selling for between $6,000 and $7,000 right now. Well, gee, that's kind of out of my price range, you know? Maybe I should kind of pull back on my idea to invest in graded comic books at present time. On the other end of the spectrum, you may have a Timmy with a credit card who says, great, I can get a CGC graded copy of giant size X-Men 1 in CGC 9.6 for $7,000. Sign me up. American Express is going to send me a hitman when I don't pay that bill, but I got my giant size X-Men 1 in CGC 9.6. That's all that Timmy cares about, because in his mind, markets in the antiques and collectibles trade only go up. Yeah, that's working really well for some people who invested back in the 1990s into the wrong collecting categories. More on that in an upcoming video. So the Overstreet Comic Book Price Guide can help you. It can also be a detriment to you. Another pro of the Overstreet Comic Book Price Guide that we got to talk about is, of course, it provides a comprehensive listing of pricing data all in one place. So if you're curious as to what key issues are for Fantastic Four related comic books, all you got to do is look them up and it'll point out to you what issues are keys. So that way, if you're new to comic books, if you come across a find of old vintage comic books in Aunt Sally's house, and unfortunately Aunt Sally had a stroke, you're clearing out her house, and you come across these books, you can at least go through and recognize what are the valuable books, what are the key issues, so you're not wasting your time. Another thing that Overstreet does right, and again, I got to state this, it does give a novice a more diverse perspective of the market. To be fair, going back to my statements on market reports, it's not like one individual is writing all those market reports. You are getting a very diverse perspective from within the trade. The problem that I have is most people who are acting from the mindset of an auction house, a dealer, an investor, a speculator, a collector, there is an incentive there to hype up the information that they're putting in those market reports. So, in my opinion, for the average person out there, whether you collect CGC graded material, whether you're a novice, whether you're a speculator, whether you're a hardcore collector, whether you're like me on the investment side of the equation where you need to know pricing information, you need to know what the market's doing, for less than $30 a year, yes, the Overstreet Comic Book Price Guide is definitely worth it. Now let's talk a little bit about GP analysis. GP analysis, in my opinion, is geared towards comic collectors and investors on the more high end of the spectrum. Let's be realistic here. If you're going to spend $120 per year to get pricing information or up-to-date pricing information by the minute, you're probably spending a significant amount or have in your collection a significant amount of holdings of graded comic books, vintage comic books, and the like. That puts you at a different level of the caliber, per se, than that of the average person who just comes across Aunt Sally's cache of vintage 1960s or 1970s comic books because they're cleaning out her house when she kicks the bucket. So it's a different type of mentality, to be fair. However, my problem with GP analysis, and before I go any further, I want to state I use GP Analysis off and on. I do like it. I have nothing against the service overall. The problem that most people don't realize is that the data is already skewed and manipulated just due to the fact that only a handful of auction companies report into GP Analysis. Only certain dealers report into GP Analysis. As a result, the market for that information, much like the Overstreet Comic Book Price Guide itself, can be manipulated. So as long as you understand that market manipulation exists in its original form, in a form that's basically unintended and intended in the antiques and collectibles trade, when you get this information, you will be at a much better place to process that information and make a decision based on the information that you are receiving. So if you are somebody who is going into the market and you're spending $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 on up for some of these CGC graded comic books, you owe it to yourself to get not only the yearly Overstreet Comic Book Price Guide, but you should also be ponying up the money for a subscription to GP Analysis. I will also give you one hint to my investors out there, my unsophisticated investors that want to become sophisticated. If you are tracking your expenses and you're truly investing in comic books or coins, whatever it is, if you buy a copy of the Overstreet Comic Book Price Guide every year and you also subscribe to GP Analysis at the $119 level, or maybe you only need it 3 months out of the year, so you pony up the $10.95 a month for 3 months out of the year, those are expenses that you can write off towards any gains that you make in these markets. So let's say that you have a $10,000 comic book collection that you only paid $8,000 for. If you go to sell that collection, you're going to net $2,000 profit because you paid $8,000 for the collection, you sold it for $10,000. Well, you can also write off of your profit the yearly cost of your Overstreet Comic Book Price Guide, the subscription, the GP Analysis, any other expenses you have related to that. So I hope that helps. So in my opinion, yes, the Overstreet Comic Book Price Guide is still relevant in the year 2020, provided you understand the risks and also the cons of using it. Thank you for watching. I hope this video served you well. If it has not served you well, please let me know in the comment section below. Thanks, and have a great night.